Good afternoon, everyone. We've got a very busy day, so without further ado, let me go ahead and turn it over to the City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Commissioners, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Excited to be here today. We've got a very exciting budget discussion for you in a workshop setting. This will be one of 7 meetings that you'll have either in the development of the budget or in the approval process of the budget. So there'll be a number of stops along the way to get your feedback. Today, we want to provide you with the first quarter update. So we're in fiscal year 2019. We want to pause and give you a glimpse of how we're proceeding this year with this year's budget, as well as talk about the assumptions that will be included in the development of next year's fiscal year 2020 budget. That discussion is going to be led by our Director of Resource Management, Robert Wiggin. He's joined by his staff that will also participate in this presentation. These workshop-style formats afford us the opportunity to hear from our experts and those that work in these fields each day. And, of course, we've got our Assistant City Managers and Deputy City Manager with us. So with that, I'd like to just turn it over to Robert, and we'll dive right in.
Thank you, Reese. Mayor, City Commissioners, appointed officials, thanks for your time today. It is a good indication of how complex and important the budget is when we have the folks here who have the expertise of the past. You're setting the course for the future and giving us direction, and so we do appreciate your time. My staff is here on the left-hand side of me, and I've got Matt Mathern and Amy McLean, who are here as senior management analysts to walk you through portions of the agenda. 4 things we want to accomplish today. We want to talk about the budget process and what it has been, get direction from you on what your expectations are for that process moving forward. We'll have the opportunity to meet 5 additional times and talk through issues and identify solutions. And then in order to kind of set the table for that, we'll talk about the fiscal year 19 budget, where we are, what the assumptions were for that budget, where we currently are after the first quarter, and that sets the stage for our fiscal year 20 budget assumptions. I've been doing budgeting now with the city for 15 years, started as an analyst, moved into a new department, worked with the utility, currently the director. Each one is unique. Each one has its own challenges and opportunities, and that's what we're looking forward to today. One part of the budget process that we've committed to these past 3 years is to meet frequently. Face-to-face meetings, discussions of questions and issues are important. Meeting with the departments frequently so that they can rise issues that they have to the top, and we can provide solutions for those items are very important. In order to facilitate that, we've got quarterly updates, as you are currently involved in. We've got agenda items. Each agenda item that comes before you has some budget implication, and so we're involved in that and want to reflect those directions that you give and that leadership that you give in those agenda items in the budget also, and so that informs our process. Most importantly, we meet with all stakeholders. We've got an online budget where there's easy interaction, communication by email. Any requests that we receive, we respond to immediately, next day service, same day or next day service, because that is what our most important direction is to hear from those stakeholders and to give that response back to what information we have, what has happened in the past, and where we're going in the future. I mentioned the updated workshops that we've got. We had a closeout item in December. We're currently in our first workshop today. We'll also have the opportunity to meet in May, June, July, and 2 meetings in September where we'll formally adopt the budget. So that's a little bit of the nuts and bolts of the process. One other aspect of the process is we focus on 14 operating funds. We've provided these funds in an overview perspective with a column for each fund of the 14 operating funds. The operating budget total for reference, the capital budget total for reference, and then the specific revenue source for those 14 operating funds. It's important to consider their mission and their vision and their values, but also then where their resources come from. And so we've provided that in a columnar format. I've got Matt and Amy going into more detail. So this is just a quick list, and a couple things I'd like to point out. The general fund is where we spend quite a bit of time talking because it is our police department, our public infrastructure, roads and sidewalks, our human service funding. And so that's an important aspect of the general fund. And then its revenue sources, ad valorem tax base, the millage rate, which we'll be talking about later today, and fiscal year 20 assumptions is very critical to most people.
Will we get a copy of the presentation?
We absolutely can provide you a copy.
Yeah, that'd be great.
One reason is we are going to jump back and forth. We've got we probably got too highly technical and have some pies that we're going to jump from, and it would have been out of order had we given it to you. But we'll make the commitment to give you PowerPoints in the future. We won't get so fancy in how we develop the PowerPoint. Thank you for that. The Building Inspections Fund is another interesting area. It receives its funding source from permitting activity, and so that is a unique aspect of building inspection. As we go down the list, those other fire services fees are specialized to the Fire Services Fund. Then we get into some of the utilities, and the utilities, you'll notice there's an asterisk besides each one of those because they provide a transfer to the general fund, and so we've denoted that. As I mentioned, Matt and Amy will go into a little bit more detail about where we currently are with those funds. My comfort zone is spreadsheets and lists. That's where my tendencies lie. I recognize, though, that when we're talking about the 14 operating funds, what really matters, though, is the outcomes. And so I'd like to just touch base on a couple of those areas. You've set the mission, vision, values for and have us working on the strategic plan for the year. We recognize that is the direction that we're going with all of the departments. City budget outcomes, crime is public safety is very important. In fact, I think what's being spoken about is we're at the second lowest crime rate in a 20-year period. So that's very positive. Unemployment is down. We know there's some numbers within that number that we have some concern about, and we're working towards addressing those. Part of economic development is a robust capital improvement plan. $161.8 million is budgeted for fiscal year 19 in our capital budget, and will allow us to put in place the infrastructure for economic opportunity. Quality of life runs as a thread through all of these important priorities. The Urban Forest Master Plan is a great example of that, the affordable housing commitments that we've made. Parks and Recreation as a nationally recognized gem within the city of Tallahassee is very important, and our recognition of human services and our support of that. So we recognize that part of the budget process is to look at the outcomes in each of these areas.
Do you mind if we ask questions as you go along?
Not at all.
Of course.
Okay.
Go ahead,
Very
Commissioner.
helpful.
So how does your outcomes comport with your goals?
Yeah, Commissioner, the mission, vision, values, the organizational goals of teamwork, of working together as departments, those goals then set us down the road to meet those priorities.
Let me rephrase it.
Sure.
Not the mission, vision, and values, but through your strategic planning process, you should have goals for which we are talking about outcomes as it relates to the expenditure of funds.
Yes.
So when I'm asking, we're talking about the outcomes. How does what you're presenting here, which is excellent, comport with what we said we would do in goals?
They're very much in line, and I think the way we get to these outcomes is those goals: community-oriented policing, public safety complex discussion, get us to the point where we're prepared to reduce crime. When we talk about unemployment, our support in the community of good-paying jobs is one of those goals that is within the government. Each of the departments have master plans. Each of the departments have goals that they're working towards, the standards that they're meeting, and then we believe that these outcomes are accomplished as a result of that.
Commissioner, if I could just add to that, just to reinforce, And just last month, I think it was, you met in your retreat and identified the priority areas, and that's really what's governed the construction of the budgets in the years past. So as the commission sets those priorities, the budget's derived around that. And in fact, you'll notice on our agenda items, we will connect the agenda material, whatever the topic might be, to the priorities so that it all fits together as it relates to the priorities of the commission. Clearly, we're working on a strategic plan, 5-year strategic plan now at your direction. So you'll see that that come into play with the development of that plan as well.
So commissioners, before we keep moving forward, I like this style of asking questions as we're going. My original intent was to have a brief presentation so everybody in the public, we were all on the same page, and then take public comment, which we have 2 speakers, and then get into it. However, I like this style, Dr. Bryant, better. So if we could, why don't we pause, take the 2 public comments, and then come back, and then just carry on the way how we're doing and stop and ask questions along the way. Y'all cool with that? Is that good? All right. So, Mr. Cook?
We do have 2 speakers. The first is Steve Stewart, and the second will be Stanley Sims.
Mr. Stewart, thank you for joining us. Your name and address for the record, please.
Steve Stewart, 3048 Waterford Drive, McLaurin Estates. Appreciate the opportunity. Been to both of the town hall meetings. I'm very encouraged by the engagement of the public. And I've been wanting to do this for last year or so. And so finally I've got the time. I won't take a lot of your time. I've got some handouts that I hope made it to. What I want to address is been frustrated over the last year or so how the local economy has been reported from different areas. I've tried to work with different groups, but it seems like some of the numbers and things aren't reported, I would say, in totality. So I think in this process where you're dealing with almost $1 billion budget, it's important to get the overall view of our local economy. And I know in the document that's handed out for a quarterly update, we have some comparisons of municipal costs that show different cities and how we rank, and we rank pretty well based on those numbers. But there also is an economic outlook section that doesn't do a lot of comparison on where we rank. And I think, again, looking at different measures, because the decisions you have to make, $60 million police station, raise taxes, or whatever, should be at least bordered on what the local economy is going through. And I don't think you can do that by just looking at saying, look, we've had job growth in Leon County. Well, I think 65 of the 67 counties, or maybe 64, have had job growth. I think the idea is, look, how are we doing relative to everybody else in Florida? So I wanted to just give you this information as a context for when you're going through, obviously, the more specifics. And so I wanted to start, first of all, acknowledging that the Tallahassee reports and Tallahassee Business Trends, I follow the local economy in great detail. We publish a number of reports on a lot of different things. 2 things that are doing really well, as we've noticed, is the airport traffic over the last year. It's up 10% over last year. We're still not above where we were at the beginning of the recession, but it is definitely on the uptick. And obviously, unemployment rate is low compared to state numbers. But what I want to do is provide you some more context. And the first one I wanted to, from different sources. This isn't from Steve Stewart's office. These are, as you'll see, are from different government sources and actually some private sources. The first one I wanted you to look at is from the Florida Association of Realtors, which is a state organization. This is a sheet that looks like this. It's stapled together with three different sheets. For 2016, 17, 18, it shows you our growth in resales of existing homes, which is a very important part of the local economy. Here in Leon County, the numbers are down from 2017 this year, and I wanted to show you how that compares relative to the rest of the state. This looks at MSAs. Our MSA, we're about 80% of the MSA, so it gives us a good idea what's going on. If you look at 2016, our growth in resales on the previous year was 8.6%. That would be the first page. If you turn the page on the stapled section, in 2017, the growth was 2.0%. And then if you turn the page again, on the third page, our growth is negative 0.5%. Now, if you look at 2018 along, which is this third page on the stapled worksheet here, I believe, and I think we rank 21 out of 22, which is obviously near the bottom in terms of that growth. And so I think that is a concern, especially given the trend that's happened the last 3 years. Now, the next one I wanted to show you was the average employment growth. This sheet says on the top, average employment growth. This is from the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity, which gets the stats from Department of Labor. This takes average employment for each month and each year, flattens it out so that there's not up and downs, and it compares the growth in employment from 2017 to 2018. As you can see here, these are presented, the MSAs are presented in rank order. Again, we are, I guess, fourth from the bottom at 1.05% growth, average employment growth. Again, there is growth there, but we are lagging a number of the other MSAs. And finally, one of my favorite stats to follow, and it looks complicated, but I'm going to make it easy, and I promise this will be easier the next time I provide it. It's called Florida Taxable Sales Index Comparison. As we know, Florida taxable sales comes right from the county in the sense of the amount of business that is generated. We pay taxes to the Florida Department of Revenue. They've created a really easy way to compare MSAs. They started with an index in 2000 of 100, and they track that index every month. And all you do is subtract the current index from 100, and that gives you the percentage growth over that time period. So what I've provided here, using that index, is our growth in taxable sales, which is talking about how how people are spending money on durable goods, real estate, business. And it doesn't include investment. It's more about spending. And if you look at this, I've given you 3 columns to look at here. These are ranked based on the last year, which is 2018. You can see that we are 21 out of 22 in terms of consumer spending. Now, there is growth, but again, as we rank across the 22 MSAs, if you look at the last 2 years, we actually had negative growth. And then if you look at the last 3 years, our growth rate is 4.4%. Now, that's not average, that's total. Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to add is what I'm going to do is update these, and we'll provide them to you quarterly. I'll try to get them on one sheet so we don't have to go through all this. But the other thing I will add, we're working on looking at new construction permits. We've had some issue with the data. We get it from both the county and the city. I will tell you, though, that in the city, the permits are down for single-family new construction, which, again, is a huge economic driver in terms of the jobs that it creates. Now, you know, as I led with the positive news of the airport and the low unemployment rate, my only purpose here is that we make decisions that fit what our local economy are doing. I'm not here to say, you know, everybody's doing a bad job or whatever, but this is the reality that I want my leaders dealing in. And so if these numbers are wrong or if there's another way to look at it, I've tried to provide numbers that are from different sources, different aspects of the economy. But I think it's clear that we're not in a rosy situation in terms of what our economy is doing. And as you sit and go through these budget updates and make decisions on hundreds of millions of dollars and where you're going to put your priorities, I think it's important that you understand this information. And so I appreciate your time, and I field any questions if you have them, and good luck with the rest of the afternoon.
I got a quick question for you, Mr. Stewart.
Yeah.
So what do you think your interpretation is on especially the Florida residential market when you say that single-family homes, we don't have a lot of turnover right now. People are not buying pre-existing homes.
Exactly.
Yet our single-family home permitting numbers. Karen, is that accurate that we're on a? Okay, so they're down a little bit. What do you think that means?
Well, no, they're not down this first quarter. They were down last year.
Right.
So they started heading down middle of summer. Well, if you start looking at the trend, it's been going down for the last 3 years. There was a recovery. So now you start wondering, what is it going to do this year? So we need to keep an eye on it. I mean, negative growth is never good on resales. But I think the bigger concern that I would look at is that the consumer spending. That tells you what people have. And we have, again, that's headed down. And, it's headed down over the last 2 years. Relative to the rest of the state, we're not growing as fast. So it's not that we're in a recession, but we are not growing as fast as the rest of the state. Hey, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to tell you that when you make decisions on taxes and priorities and where to spend things, that I think you need to keep this in mind. And look, everybody has a perspective on what these numbers mean. I think that if you go out and look at what businesses are doing, I don't think they're giving raises. I don't know how many people are, and I'm talking about small businesses are doing a lot of capital investment, so that's an issue. But I think, again, This is the city of Tallahassee is a big employer in Leon County. I think it's in the top 5. So, I think it's important that the priorities be aligned with what other businesses have to do. I mean, these are concerning numbers. I mean, the Tallahassee Economic Index, which is done by a finance group here in town, has been showing that the economy has been slowing since last summer, and it's continuing to do that. Again, I'm not as concerned with where we're headed. I just want you to be aware of this. We don't have, local government does not provide these comparisons. Right? You got comparisons on municipal costs. I've talked about it over the last year or so when we had that stat that said we had the fastest growing economy in the state of Florida, which was revised. But we need to compare. The chamber's going to Greenville to compare. So we need to compare to see where we are, and that impacts decisions that you make as not one of the bigger employers and one of the levers we have to drive economic growth. But if I was sitting in your chairs, I'd be concerned about what I'm seeing here in terms of not just 1 year, but what's going on over the last 2 or 3 years. We see Lakeland in there as a comparison on municipal costs. Their economy is growing at a pretty good rate. Maybe we need to go to Lakeland. I don't know.
Thanks,
Anyway.
Steve.
Well, I appreciate your
Thank
question.
you. Curtis, let it be known for the record that for the first time ever, Steve said he's not here to tell us what to do. All right, just want to make sure that we got that on the record. All right. Thanks, Steve. Jim?
I have not necessarily a question, but Steve, so are you saying that the consumer spending is down, so people need to make more money? We need the other businesses to join the city of Tallahassee in paying livable wages?
Say that again.
You were saying that the concern is with consumer spending? So are we saying that we need employers to pay employees better so they have more money to spend and join the city of Tallahassee in paying livable wages?
Well, no, I think the issue is if you assume that people are making a lot of money and hoarding it or not paying wages, that would be I would agree with you. If you assume that there's not enough jobs or enough economic stimulus, and so business owners are not giving raises or increasing wages because they're just to stay in business, then that's another issue. You need to figure that out. I don't know that we have a bunch of small businesses that are hoarding money and not paying people. Maybe we do, but I think there's 2 sides of that. If you think there's enough money in the economy and that it's not being distributed properly, that's one issue. I think if you look at those numbers, there's too much consensus coming from different things, and I think the overall economy is suffering. If there's one area that was suffering, that'd be one thing. But I think there's something structurally wrong. And when I say wrong, we're just not growing like everybody else is. And I think to present that just because we have job growth or because the unemployment rate is low, to give you guys, oh, well, that's good news, let's go ahead and spend money, or let's do this. I think this should drive on maybe your priorities. But I just want the information to be there so you're not like, oh, I didn't realize this. Because there is more information out there that I think should impact you than just the fact that, we had job growth last year. We did, but it was minuscule compared to what other counties. We ranked 16th out of 20 of the large counties in job growth. That's counties, a smaller area. So, I think there's a bigger issue than having somebody pay minimum wage. I think it's about the amount of money coming into Leon County.
Point's well taken.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We can make the argument as well, that especially back when we were during the recession, we compared very well to other communities. We never hit the high, we never hit the low. But yeah, Steve's got good points that should be taken into consideration. Yeah, Commissioner.
I think a couple of these things line up with our existing priorities when we've seen, based on what was presented, a $28,000 increase in median housing costing when we're talking about affordable housing. And we're seeing our unemployment go down, but we're seeing wages remain low. I believe the Alice population actually grew, so the working poor actually have less money than they had, and now housing is, 10-15% higher. And we talk about the sales tax collection. When we get money into the hands of people who can spend it, we'll see that increase. And I think we see when we focus on local businesses and locally owned businesses, those are the people that really circulate dollars throughout our economy and will drive that sales tax. So I think as we're having these conversations, maybe we should look to measure success and decrease poverty, increase wages in the middle class, how much spending ability that they have rather than an unemployment number.
Great point. Reverend Sims? Pastor Sims? Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Commissioner Matlow, you just brought my speech down 15 minutes. I wanted to share with you, first I want to really thank city staff for the way that those public hearings were conducted. I am just so happy of how things went. You know, the snacks and everything. I like snacks, you know what I mean? So I just wanted to put that, Mr. Gold, your staff did a tremendous job in making people feel comfortable to speak. Commissioner put 5 on it. I came here today because I'm asking the City Commission in your 5-year strategic plan to adopt a living wage, not a minimum wage. If you look there at that number, it says unemployment is 2.9% below the state. But what that does not tell you is that those individuals who we left last night are working 2 minimum wage jobs and still not able to afford health care. So being a major leader and employer in this town and the connections that you have with Tallahassee Memorial and other large things, we're asking you to put into your strategic plan that we started. The ball has got to roll somewhere in starting promoting a living wage. It has been a part of your argument that putting that $60 million police station over there is going to increase property value. It is known that those residents of that area, over 65% of them are either renters, Section 8, or public housing. So I don't know where you're going with that, but this is a budget. The other thing that I'm doing, I'm not as eloquent as Mr. Stewart, but I'm trying. I dressed up for this event to make sure that my language and my behavior will look like I'm dressed. And am I doing so far good, Mr. Mayor? Good, thank you. My next point is the DIA.
Before we move on, let me address that because that's a very important point. You'll be very proud of the fact that the city of Tallahassee as an employer is one of the leaders on this issue.
Yeah.
And I give Mayor Pro Tem credit for being part of the commission that did establish a living wage within the city of Tallahassee with a base hourly wage of $12 an hour. They are one of the leaders. That was implemented previously. We have done that.
Are you aware that we still have city employees that are not making 12?
No, the baseline salary is $12 an hour.
That's not accurate.
Okay. So when it comes to outside in the private sector as well, I know this is something that we've all been interested in, and unfortunately, the city of Miami Beach tried to establish a living wage throughout the entire community, including the private industry. It was struck down at the appeals court level, correct me if I'm wrong, and then it was appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided not to address it, which means that the appeals court ruling against the city of Miami Beach in the state of Florida stands. What that means is that local governments do not have the opportunity to set individual living wages based on their community itself. Now, again, we can set the example and lead by example. I'm proud of the commission for doing that. I just want to make sure you understand we do not have the legal authority based on the court ruling to implement a citywide living wage that affects the private industry.
I do understand that, and that's why I came to you to get the ball rolling to implement a $12 wage. And I think that you need to defer with staff because I'm aware of a living current city employee who is not making $12 an hour. So all city employees at this time is not making $12 an hour. And so if they should be, my son's finna get a big retro check because he's not making 12 and hadn't been. My next point that I would like for this commission to also to bring special attention to is the DIA. Senator Bill Mumford, when my children was going to when my kids were going to Roberts Elementary, they would he would always say the most sacred day of the week is Sunday at church, because they were a part of only 17% of minorities over on the Northeast side. Well, I've discovered every day of the week, downtown businesses is segregated. There is not a black business downtown. Jake the Shoe Shine Man is no longer downtown. The Peanut Man is not even downtown. So I have been saying it at the DIA meetings, and they go back into their discussions, and they still, in my opinion, has not seen the need or the importance to address this issue of the DIA. The DIA is currently having some financial issues. And so I'm asking that a strategic plan or some type of direction or oversight be looked upon at the DIA to make sure that downtown is reflective of Tallahassee. Because, Mayor, what concerns me is it's not that we do not have prominent minority businesses here in Tallahassee. The question is, why have they not chosen downtown? And so, and a lot of that is with rent and cost. And so I'm asking that a strategic plan be made for them as well. My last and very short is, we constantly see increase in funding, and I love the police. I love the police. I'm very not that, but when Anita Favors were here, we advocated for a balance. We wanted more funding for law enforcement and more funding for CHSP processes, more opportunities, more flexibility. Everybody can't fit that CHSP process because it's not always user-friendly for your mom and pop organization. Commissioner Matlow, when I say those mom and pop organizations, Ms. Commissioner, I'm talking about that retired family that every Tuesday come down and pass out food from a U-Haul. They don't have the skill set to go through this CHSP process to do so. But you can see those people start lining up at 6 in the morning and she don't get there to 2 o'clock. And so in your budget, these things, I don't see where there's an increase in CHS funding. Thank you for my time.
You're welcome.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah, Commissioner.
I want to address a concern that Mr. Sims mentioned. Of course, we do need more, but there is one black-owned business downtown who has received CRA funding to do some repairs to their building. That's Margot's of Tallahassee. So we're hoping that she will be, when she gets her business back online, she's right on Gaines Street, between right next door to where Savannah's used to be. Margot's is right there.
If I'm correct, that's not in the DIA jurisdiction.
Well, it's downtown.
Right. I'm saying where the money that is allocated, that we contribute to, from what I was told by the committee, that it wasn't. Even they have confirmed.
Oh, well, I'm not, I'm just saying, of course, we could always use more. I just wanted to give her kudos for hanging at, being able to hang in there.
Thank you.
Do we have any other public comment? No, sir. Excellent. All right, let's move forward. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you. And speaking about process, before we touch on the fiscal year 19 budget and the fiscal year 20 assumptions, one last area that we look at is municipal cost comparison. You're probably very familiar with it. It does compare our residential cost for city services within the city of Tallahassee. We look at 11 comparable cities. Hollywood, West Palm Beach, Clearwater, and Fort Lauderdale are shown in the red as some of the higher cost cities. And we move down into yellow and green. Good news is that the city of Tallahassee was the second lowest in residential costs last year. this year were the lowest among those comparable cities in residential cost. The residential cost that we're looking at is the millage rate. We're looking at and calculating a city property tax bill, and then looking at an average water, sewer, electric, solid waste, stormwater bill, and also including a fire services fee, the cost for that for a residential homeowner. Those total costs are then also factored and looked at from a median home value, and then we also compare our percent of taxable property, our population, the square miles, and a cost of living index to give some perspective. It's a good benchmark so that we can look on a regular basis as we make these decisions on what we are going to do with our 14 operating funds, how it's going to affect a residential homeowner. We go through a similar comparison for businesses, small businesses, larger type of office buildings. They're so much more complex that we usually pull out one or two to give some examples, and we'll bring those back as soon as we have the data collected. And I do appreciate Mr. Stewart's observations. We'll continue to look at the statistics that he provides. With that note, giving you an overview of the process, I'd like to ask Matt Mathern to do a deeper dive in the general fund and give some details of that.
Thank you, Robert. Mayor, Commissioners, City Executive Team, my name is Matt Mathern. I've been with the city for 12 years. I'm going on my 4th year as part of the resource management team. Previously, I worked at the electric utility, also worked as a director for the Utility Business Systems Division, and also served as a project manager for the city's smart grid project. So I have experience in the enterprise area, project management area, as well as general fund operations. My focus with the Resource Management Office has been general fund revenue estimating and tracking, the annual truth and millage process, and I work with general fund departments such as growth management, planning, code enforcement. Additionally, I also work with enterprise funds such as building inspections and fire. With your guidance each year through meetings like this, we seek to put together a budget that funds your priorities and promotes fiscal excellence. What I'd like to do for the next few minutes is take a more detailed look at both the expenses and the revenues that make up the most discussed and perhaps the most complex fund in the city, the general fund. Beginning with a look at the categories of expense that you see on the pie chart, excuse me, that shows the various departmental and functional areas where we provide services directly to the public. One of the complexities I've since learned to really appreciate about the general fund is that it contains a wide range of coordinated services provided by multiple departments to support a service-based strategic plan tied to the city's goals of public safety, infrastructure investment, quality of life, and economic development. Beginning with a large public safety investment in the police department, as well as the city's contribution to the Consolidated Dispatch Agency and our various neighborhood-based programs, where the good news is that this general fund investment has meant in terms of a reduced crime rate for our community. But additionally, from a budget perspective, we would like to highlight the leveraging of federal grant dollars for our COPS grant program, and to also highlight the issue of multiple departments providing coordinated neighborhood services towards a goal. We look at the TPD investment of the COPS squad, that's COPS with 2 Ps, and that's the ladies and gentlemen in the yellow vests with the bikes, as well as code enforcement investment and cleaning up lots in neighborhoods so that these efforts complement one another. It's not just a single departmental focus, it's complementary focus. Then moving next to the infrastructure investment, represented in the city's public infrastructure and community beautification service areas, where a diversified investment approach provides funding for everything from our tree canopy to streets and sidewalks, as well as the coordination of these projects where appropriate, with other capital investments that could include the utilities or blueprint, for example, another example of leveraging, to ensure that we are being as efficient as possible in our approaches to project management and implementation. On to the quality of life investments in our Parks and Rec, Neighborhood Affairs Department, Star Metro, Community Housing Departments, just as some examples. These dollars go to fund a wide variety of services from parks maintenance, youth and adult recreational programs, community gardens, and neighborhood enhancements. So not only is there expense in funding diversity within the general fund, but within the departments in the fund, there's a wide array of services being provided that more importantly are aligned and coordinated to focus on services that enhance our community. Then also to the economic development investments in the general fund that are enhanced through the achievement of the other three goals, but also seek to strategically leverage local, state, and national sources of revenue and resources where appropriate to keep the city of Tallahassee a destination city and a city that invests in the local economy both through its operations and its capital investments as ways to keep as many of our investment dollars within the local community as possible. So, how are all these services funded within the general fund? The answer to that is with an equally wide array of revenue sources. The city's diversified portfolio of revenue sources ensures we are not solely reliant on property taxes, which, as a very significant and dependable source of revenue, the city has worked to keep low in comparison to both our peers across the state, as shown earlier by Robert in the municipal cost comparison, but locally as well, which all property owners see each year when we open up our truth and millage notifications and see the city's low 4.1 millage rate. This is the recognition that while ad valorem taxes are a foundational revenue source of the general fund, only a portion of our local community pays property taxes, thus the additional feature within the fund that relies on a diversity of other revenue sources as well. So jumping back to the view of the entire array of sources within the fund, we show the property taxes fund about a quarter of the general fund services, but it also consists of a multitude of other revenue sources to include revenue sources such as grants, overhead allocations where we recoup our administrative costs, not only within the fund, but also from other funds where appropriate, state sharing of revenues such as sales taxes, our utility systems return on investment transfers, and many user fees where those who use a service pay for it. The user fees located within the funds are spread across various recreational programs, applications for growth management reviews, and parking fees, just as a few examples. So for the last few minutes, I focused on the general fund. I'm going to now turn over the presentation to my teammate Amy, and she's going to focus on a review of the first quarter results and requested budget adjustments and amendments. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Amy McLean. I've been with the city for 6 years in the Resource Management Department. I've been in municipal budget and finance for 28 years. My focus in the Resource Management Department is budget development, capital infrastructure, and development of analysis tools. I'll be reviewing the status of our financial progress after the first quarter. And what's important to know after we've looked at the first quarter is there's some key questions we want to answer. One of which is, are the financial results on pace with our budget plan? Are key metrics that we're monitoring in line with our estimates? And are there any adjustments that we need to make to ensure that the plan remains functional and in tune with the needs of the community? So the answer to that question is provided in your table, but it's yes, in the first quarter, our progress is in line and on pace with the budget plan that we adopted. The key metrics that we review for the different funds are consistent with the estimates that we considered when developing the budget. And yes, we do have a few amendments that you have in your package that will assist us in making appropriate adjustments to the budget plan. One of the things I wanted to do is give you a little bit of an idea of how we arrive at these determinations that we're on pace and that key indicators are on pace as well. And that is in the exhibit that you see here. These can be different indicators for different funds. As Matt indicated, we have a variety of different businesses that we operate, so some of the things we monitor vary as well. In this example, we're again focusing on the general fund, and you can see from the yellow piece that is the personnel piece of general fund that is a key issue in the general fund is staffing and workforce costs. We're service-based, and it shows. And the biggest piece of that, of course, is our police department. And that is in alignment with the priorities that you have set on public safety, is making sure that they have the resources they need to do the public engagement and law enforcement activities that improve our crime statistics and make us safer. The chart on the right is also showing how over time we've made changes in the in the public safety resources by increasing the number of police FTEs compared to per capita. So that's just a chart showing since 15 how we've increased that level. Again, that aligns us with the priority that has been established as prior, and the one that you've reaffirmed, that public safety is one of our highest priorities. So we'll continue to monitor staffing, vacancies, use of overtime in the general fund to make sure that we're keeping an eye on what's the significant indicator for that fund. Now, just to give another example, I wanted to show one that is a little different, which is this is a table of our gas fund. This shows the two lines you see are gas sales and consumption, which, as you would expect, are very closely, directly related. But the red columns that you see there are indications of weather impacts, cold weather impacts on those sales and consumption. So this indicator gives us an idea that if we have a particularly cold or particularly mild wet season, that can have an impact on the revenue collection and the consumption for the year. So these are indicators that we monitor above and beyond just looking at crunching the numbers to make sure we have a picture of how our services are working and how they will progress through the plan that we've made. And on the next slide, you'll see that we have, and in your packet you will have seen that we have amendments that we've brought for approval. All of these amendments that you have are revenue and expense neutral, with the exception of one, which is the recognition of a non-recurring revenue from the sale of timber, and it's for $33,576, and that those funds will be added on approval of the agenda to the Southeast Park project to help fund that project. So the others are all just moving things around, but they don't change the total revenue and expense of our budget. So if there's any questions, I'd be glad to respond.
Any questions?
If not,
Great.
I'll turn it back over to Mr. Wiggin.
One other aspect of the work we do is the cost reimbursement for hurricanes. We've the past 3 years have experienced really bad weather between Hermine, Irma, and Michael. Each of the departments were planned for, responded to, and then recovered from those storms. Part of that recovery effort is then to track cost of what they expensed and what is eligible for reimbursement from the federal government and from the state. It's a tedious process. It's a good indication of how closely they're tracking staff time, of how closely they're completing work orders, of how closely they're monitoring their inventory, increasing it before the storm, tracking it, and then expensing it after the storm. And then that documentation is the basis for which we are then eligible to be reimbursed by the federal government. Over the prior 3 storms, we've submitted $32.3 million in eligible costs for reimbursement. We've received about $12 million of that, about $9 million of that cost for reimbursement. It's a time-consuming process, especially with back-to-back storms. We've seen a slowdown in the recovery efforts for Hermine and for Irma from a cost recovery perspective once Michael hit, and some of the counties to the left of us, to the west of us, were greatly impacted, and so a lot of resources are focused on their recovery. We continue to provide the documentation, answer any questions, and ensure that we recover that money. I think it's a good example of the financial viability of the government and its importance when we're expending this amount of money, expending this amount of resources, and giving ourselves the capacity to be able to recover it over time at some eventual period in time where we'll share in that expense of about 12% of that total expense. So that's something that we wanted to bring to your attention and let you know that we're continuing to work through that process.
If I can interrupt for just a second and add to what Robert is saying. So I think these expenses, for for the last 3 storms. The direct cost to the city, somewhere in the neighborhood of $42 to $43 million, which clearly is unexpected, and no one would expect it to happen year after year. And at this rate, we hold our breath. But we test this, so Robert and his team do a good job seeking recovery. We don't get full recovery, but we are fortunate to have some expectation of recovery. It's not necessarily timely. We understand that, so that creates potential pressure on our liquidity and our available working capital. We work closely with the Treasurer Clerk's office to make sure we don't get into trouble where we don't have adequate liquidity. We don't have adequate coverage to where it harms our financial credit ratings. So we are at a time where we've spent considerable dollars. We've recovered $9 million or so relative to $40+ million in expenses. I think we're okay right now. It does speak to our overall financial strength, but these are things that are monitored very closely. Work closely with Jim and his staff to make sure we don't get into trouble.
I would just add there, that's why you have those kinds of reserves. We've had any number of occasions over decades in the city's history where we've had funds that we've had to expend, whether for a hurricane or operating money coming out of a recession when the revenues that they're tracking so closely aren't what you'd like them to be, but they're what you expect them to be. And then when we recover, we replenish those. So that that coordinated effort of making sure that you have reserves, not just for rating agencies, they rate us on how well we're doing. What we want to do is do well. So those reserves are so that we can do well, manage through difficult situations like this one, and then when we do recover all the money, we're back in a strong position for the next go-round, whatever that might be.
So question, when it comes to storm recovery, especially FEMA reimbursements, we, first of all, do we negotiate all of our rates up front for like storm debris? Okay. Do we wait until the storm season comes, or do we negotiate with the private contractors here locally, set our rates in advance so that when an event does happen, we're good to go?
We enter into contracts, existing contracts that are established up front with the rates predefined, the competitive rates. Federal law requires us to enter into those contracts where we're going to acquire services. Debris is a great example of those early contracts. We also participate in mutual aid agreements with other local utilities to ensure that when our staffing needs to increase to respond to a storm, that we have that capacity available to us and can provide that same capacity when they ask for that assistance.
So the way how the process works is that we pay all of it up front, usually out of our reserves that we properly budgeted for, and then we apply for the FEMA reimbursements, whether it's the mutual aid agreement through our utility, getting electric lines back up and running, or whether it's storm debris.
That's accurate, yes.
Excellent. This is related, are we being good community partners right now over in the Panhandle too? I know that one of the pressure points that the other municipalities are finding right now is this exact issue, that they've got, say, $10 million budget and $40 million worth of debris pickup around their neighborhoods. Are we reaching out and thinking creatively on how we can help them until they have their FEMA reimbursements? Have we gone down that road at all by chance, Mr. Manager?
Mr. Mayor, I appreciate that question. We've done a lot of mutual aid assistance.
Okay.
As it relates to utility assistance, not limited to electric. Even separate and apart from the storms, you may recall we went to East Point and helped them recover from a fire and collected a bunch of debris and lent our expertise and resources. So that's a pretty normal thing. And clearly we're working with them in those communities where they've run into trouble in the ability to pay for those services.
Right.
And so we're very mindful of that, working with them in that regard as they're able to work through that. In fact, I believe as it relates to one of the budget amendments, there was some moving dollars around as it relates to dollars we spent for mutual aid. So that we spend those dollars, we get reimbursed from them, we recognize not everybody has the ability to pay those quickly. So that's been part of our consistent effort.
So this is really good news, colleagues, and the city does a great job of this. 2 years ago, great lesson learned from the municipalities in South Florida is that, remember, some of them did not have their rates locked in advance. And after the storm hit, it became a free market, just crazy. And sent the rates sky high. And I know that a lot of y'all remember, we were dealing with it at the county as well, when we were trying to find additional assistance when we thought that second storm was going to hit. And we were looking as far north as Tennessee and North Carolina, and they were all going to South Florida because the competitive nature during the storm event was going on, and it was difficult. It is great to hear that everything is taken care of in advance. The rates are negotiated in advance. We're properly budgeted, and heaven forbid we have a storm this year, we'll be ready to face it.
Mr. Mayor?
Sure.
I just wanted to point out that our reserve funds have been fully funded, as well as our deficiency fund, in light of the fact that we've maintained our millage rate at 4.1 the last 3 years. That's important to point out as well.
That's a perfect segue, Commissioner Richardson.
Okay.
The next slide talks about some of our fiscal year 20 budget assumptions as we move forward through development of the fiscal budget that will start October 1 of 2019. The original assumption, one of the original assumptions that we work with is that our millage rate will remain at 4.1 mils as we go forward in this year. Now that we will report a rollback rate, which will identify what amount of additional revenue we're realizing from maintaining that millage rate. We look at that increased revenue as the opportunity to provide additional services for growth in the community. Additional home value, new home ownership, new homes that are built do generate new revenue, and rather than rolling back the millage rate for that, we maintain the millage rate. Ad valorem is one of the two areas one of the two largest revenue sources in the general fund. The increase in ad valorem is probably enough to fund police officer pay raises. So it's very important that we maintain that as a revenue source. We continue to fully fund the general fund deficiencies reserve, as was mentioned, again, for unexpected events, for whether they're disasters or downturns in the economy, so we can respond, lean forward into those challenges. We also are committing to maintain operating costs at 2019 levels, which means finding efficiencies within the general fund to meet the demands for service, maintaining that cost at the same amount. We do expect to see consumer price index growth for our utilities, and we'll budget for that as we move forward. The Community Human Service Partnership, the program, is assumed to be budgeted at $2.1 million. That's the second year of our agreement with the Human Service Partners. It's an amount that we entered into a contract with. The efficiency and effectiveness of contracting for 2 years allows us to enter into a study to make sure that we have the right categories and award criteria. And so we'll bring back those results as they come forward. This is also assuming that we're maintaining our outside agency funding. We do have some direct funding that we make of outside agencies. It's our about 25 different agencies that don't qualify for CHSP funding, and that has been set at about $1,017,000. Any requests that we get, we'll bring back and make a recommendation for that funding, and we'll continue to fund COCA at the same levels.
What's the deadline for those requests?
We don't have a specific deadline. We put feelers out into the community to understand what the needs are and receive all requests as they come in. So there's not a specific deadline where we ask for folks to respond back for those. We do have contracts in place for quite a number of those. We do work with the departments to verify that the work that's being done is supporting what they would otherwise have to do as a department, to verify that we should continue that funding.
And we're also making sure that they align with our priorities, the new priorities.
Correct.
Well, not necessarily new, but the ones that came out of the retreat. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right.
Let me follow up on that. So is there established criteria, or is it at the discretion of the department? And, well, let me stop there.
There hasn't been a hard and fast criteria for making those decisions. I think we've in the past have talked about, is there a more concrete process that we could bring these agencies through? The challenge is that there are reasons that they're not eligible for the CHSP process. Those very same reasons means that setting additional criteria, it's not an easy answer. And so we've worked with the departments to make sure that if we are providing resources to them, that it's supporting or supplanting work that they would have to otherwise do.
Any other questions?
Yeah, let me add to that. As part of the CHSP process that we just went to a 2-year cycle, so this is the second-year cycle. In the off year, we are looking at the CHSP categories because they haven't been revisited in a number of years. Part of the discussions that we've had is to create a new category for agencies that aren't eligible for CHSP, so those can go through that process and not have to come to us for approval. Yes. And as part of that process, we anticipate establishing some sort of criteria to determine what agencies would go through that pot of money. So that process is ongoing. We hope to have that completed by the end of this CHSP year to implement in 2021.
So, thank you. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, because this is very important, and I'm very excited about it. That means it takes the political bullseye off of the budget process of individual requests and picking winners and losers, and it allows for everyone to compete on an even playing field without the politics involved.
That's correct. Okay. And so what we've discussed is the funding that is currently being allocated for those agencies, probably rolling all of that or some of that into the CHSP process for this new category.
Cool.
Mr. Mayor?
Sure, Commissioner Matlow.
As we develop that process, are there already thoughts of how we can include more people so it's not the exact same year after year? Are we thinking a scale down and let more people have access to it? Or?
Yeah, and Michael Parker probably is best to answer this, but we do have a consultant working with us to determine what the new categories are going to be in the overall CHSP process. And I think as part of that, there'll be some new criteria that'll come out to address your issues.
Okay.
Good question.
Yeah, very good.
Okay.
Thank you, Raul. City infrastructure projects and maintenance projects we're going through the capital budget process right now. We've established a cash flow process, a master planning process to increase efficiencies so we can be flexible about moving money to those projects that are moving forward fastest, those that have right-of-way issues or challenges in whether they're acceptable to neighborhoods, then that money can be put to use earlier and faster. Part of that process is also then to coordinate with what spending we have from the general fund, investment in roads and sidewalks with what we see coming on board through the CRA and through Blueprint 2020. And so we're developing that plan for the capital improvement process, and we'll bring back those details to you.
Question in regards to the capital improvements, and you mentioned sidewalks. I know that there's a priority list somewhere of locations for some of these things to occur, and that may or may not be your arena, but I just want to put it out there, that making sure that someone's monitoring this priority list and making sure that these things are being done, because we heard a lot over the past couple of days about the need for sidewalks in places, and we didn't just start hearing that. We've been hearing that a long time, and I don't have to remind you that I live on the south side, so they're correct. Where can I find that list of priorities of where we're working to get these sidewalks and infrastructure improvements in place?
That would be our public infrastructure department, and we can provide that
Okay.
list to you.
And for each one of those, we have a targeted timeline for when they're supposed to occur, like within which fiscal year or that kind of thing?
Commissioners, we have the sidewalk list. I'm going to say the total right now is over $100 million worth of needs on that sidewalk priority list. We've broken it down into Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 categories. Tier 1 are those that, are, like we said, top priority moving forward. We have that list is updated annually. So anytime we hear those projects that come out of community meetings, people call our shops, we evaluate based on the criteria that we have in that priority list. Now, as funding sources become available, you have the opportunity to leverage. You can shift that list up and down based on those funding opportunities. So you do have a little bit of flexibility to adjust some of the prioritization on that list.
Okay,
Commissioner
just to follow up on that, now, things are added at the bottom of the list, or things move around on the priority list?
They move around on the priority list based on meeting the criteria that the commission adopted about 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. And we can provide you all of that criteria as part of the update.
Commissioner Matlow.
I don't want to go too far on a tangent, but I think it would be advantageous to relook at how we're allocating some sidewalks. I know when we look at Meridian Road behind the proposed safety campus, it technically fits because there's a sidewalk across the street, but there's not really handicap accessibility or anything on the Save-A-Lot side. So it's not really a functional area for a sidewalk, but that gets ranked 300 or so, whereas my neighborhood, we live in a no-outlet road, and we're ranked 200 spots ahead of it. We would love to have a sidewalk, but I think the need is greater, and trying to address maybe, I don't know how you would say, a common-sense approach to how we meet actual need versus just criteria.
Yeah, I can generally say that those roads that do not have any sidewalks rank higher than others that do have a sidewalk at least on one side, because you do have some mobility. It's crossing over that I think is creating the concern that you're saying on Meridian.
Let me follow up to both of those. Yes. I think what's equally as important is that we let people know where they are. Because if I assumed that I was number 2 and then something came along that had a higher priority, and these things happen, I'm still expecting to be number 2, unless someone tells me differently. I think this communication piece is foundational to our ability to have good public sharing in our communities.
Moving on.
The next budget development assumption that we use, we recognize the staff is probably our greatest expense and our most important resource. Employee raises will be consistent with the fiscal year 19 budget and our collective bargaining agreements. We don't know yet where the county and or the state raises are going to be, and so as we identify what those are, the challenge is we want to make sure that we keep our staff whole and recognize the effort that they put into the work that they do.
We do know where the state raises are going to be.
Commissioner Williams.
Where it's been for the past 8-9 years. But I do want to, on that note, Robert, Mr. Sims has raised an issue that there's someone amongst our ranks that is not making the minimum 12. And I think that I'm sure the city manager and you all will find out who those people are, and you'll rectify that. But I'm also glad to hear that having come from the state environment, a consideration of a raise is at least on the table. And I think that's noteworthy because the city staff I've found to be not only worthy of a raise, but worthy of our accommodations because they do an outstanding job. And I'm glad to see that not only management, but rank and file will also be able to get a little bit more money to take to the grocery store as well.
Excellent.
Mayor.
Mr. Pro Tem.
Thank you. And that, Commissioner Williams-Cox, that's an excellent observation. And that's been one of the things that's been important to this commission since I've been here, is that we give those employee raises. I think it's been at 3%, Robert, if I'm not mistaken. And because what you have to consider also is that the cost of benefits go up, the cost of health care and other benefits. And so we've been able to somewhat keep pace with the increase in those costs. So they haven't seen a decrease like state employees have in their income. So that's been one of the things that's been important to this commission.
Let me go ahead and state for the record as well, I have always been fully in favor of rewarding good employees when we can, and that should always be one of our top priorities.
Yeah.
So at the beginning of the budget process, I think that we need to keep that in mind, make sure that we budget appropriately. Now, on the idea of the issue that was brought up earlier, it is the difference between a full-time employee and a part-time employee
Right.
regarding the $12 an hour or not. If you are currently a part-time employee, you do not receive other benefits that a full-time employee would. So I have already asked the city manager to do a quick analysis of if we were to move from change the policy and move from part-time employees up to $12 an hour, what would be the fiscal impact to the budget to bring back for consideration during the budget process? These are the type of issues that we would talk about. With the current budget, the current policy, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Pro Tem, deals with full-time
Full-time,
employees. So, yeah, that's something we can talk about in the future.
Okay.
Moving forward. All right. Go ahead.
Thank you. As we've discussed in the closeout item, solid waste is currently on schedule to undergo a rate study. Tipping fees, transportation fees, and recycling markets have changed, and so we're evaluating where those fees would be to establish their budget for the next 5 years, and we'll bring back recommendations for that early in this process. We also are recommending that we look at parks and recreation fees, adult fees, and activity fees, and bring those to full cost or near market rates for the services they provide. The intent would be to talk to advisory boards for parks and recreation. Also recognize that our youth and our senior have discounts, and we would maintain that same approach for those sports and recreation activities that they're involved in, and make a recommendation based on what it looks like in the current market. We've been careful to ensure that those rates were kept where they were currently for the past 3 years, and it's probably time to look at those again.
Okay.
Having a little experience with parks and rec fees, especially with baseball and other sports, being the mother of 3 sons and managing a baseball park, we've watched those fees kind of creep up. But you're right, there are, for those who can exhibit need, there has been assistance to make sure that those kids could still participate if they have need. And I applaud that effort, and I'm glad to hear that we're going to continue that, because we need more kids playing sports. Because if they're playing sports, they're not getting in trouble. So we need to make sure that we do that. So thank you.
And Parks and Recreation has recognized that it's not just teens, but those who are early in adulthood too, that need to maintain that contact for their neighborhoods and for their recreation. The last two, we want to ensure that we take all feedback and any resulting city commission actions that need to be reflected in the budget, and we will do so. And then as the city's mission, vision, mission and organizational values or community priorities are finalized or developed, then any budgeting impacts will be reflected in the fiscal year 20 budget also. As you know, I hope we've given you a good picture of where we are in fiscal year 19, how we establish the budget, the conditions of the current budget, and how it then predicts where we may go in 2020. Our next steps are some additional workshops and agenda items, and I've listed these out for you. May 15th is a critical workshop where we'll have the fiscal year 20 budget discussion about what some of these impacts are, fiscal impacts of a $12 for part-time employees, health care, some raise proposals. And then we'll also have a second quarter update at that workshop. June 5th, we'll bring back the fiscal year 20 budget plan. It's essentially the city manager's proposed budget to get your feedback on that. And that'll allow us on July 10th to set a tentative millage rate before state of Florida requires statutory requirements. In the past, we have entertained the commission verifying that 4.1 mils at an earlier agenda item, and if that's your direction, we will do so. And then final steps in the budget process are September 11th and 25th, September 25th, first public hearing and final public hearing and adoption of the budget. With that, if there's any questions, we'll be glad to answer those. We'd ask you to accept the status report on the first quarter, accept the amendments that we're recommending, and give us any direction for the fiscal year 20 budget process. Thank you.
Couple questions real quick. First of all, great presentation. Thank you. Remind me, when do we get the first estimations from the property appraiser's office? So we start having an idea specifically to the city of Tallahassee what property revenues off the millage look like. Is that before the May 15th workshop or the June 5th?
Yeah, we'll get those in early June, and then the final is by July 1st.
July 1st. And then
The final number is July 1st. Preliminaries are probably 2-3 weeks before that.
by law, we have to have basically the proposed budget, for the July 10th?
You have to establish a millage rate before you go on break, because
Correct.
there's a number of days that are required. So because the commission goes on break after July 10th, we usually do it on that day or before.
Excellent. Excellent. Any other questions?
Let me ask one
Sure, Dr.
additional
Bryant.
question. With regards to your various divisions, departments, do they have their own budget? And let me stop. Do they have their own budget?
Yes, and we stayed at a high level at the fund level. Within each of the 14 operating funds, there are departments and divisions that have a particular focus, and that budget is what we build up from to provide the pro forma or the fund level budgets.
So they're responsible for staying within their budgets?
Absolutely. And I think some of the interaction that we have with them is to, the back and forth conversation about, we use weather as a predictor of sales, and here's how the weather occurred during the first 3 to 6 months, and how is that going to change the resulting 6 months of the year, and what changes do we need to make as a result of that plan. The general fund, it's really staffing. What programs are we providing, and how are we fully staffed, and then what's the result of overtime or temporary wages on that also.
So as we look into the future and develop a strategic plan, I'm assuming that whatever those goals are by department will link directly back to their budget. Is that a good assumption?
Yes.
Yes.
The answer came from over here.
Any final comments?
Commissioner Bryant, if I could real quick, give you an example, as I see it, of something that works that way is we look at, in the fire department, for example, response times. We look in the police department at response times. The higher upstream results of that are lower crime rate. But there are a lot of performance measures behind that departments track. More and more of them are putting them on performance websites, on their web pages for citizens to see, so they're tracking their performance. We're seeing more and more of that. And to me, there's like two different levels. There's some of the outcomes we talk about publicly and take pride in, and then there's the other performance metrics behind that are some of the details and down in the weeds where the departments measure themselves and hold their staff accountable for those results.
Very good.
Commissioner Williams-Cox.
Along those same lines, I received Robert and Raul and city manager. You all did a briefing with me and gave me this information about the 14 different funds. I've since had an opportunity to look at this even closer, and I would like to ask if you can, I know you can, for each of these funds, which department is responsible for maintaining it, and who is that department head? Would be good. If you can get it to fit on here, you can make it smaller. Just put it on one sheet for me so I can have it as my cheat sheet. And I'm sure if everybody else wants it, you share it with them as well. But I'm a
Yes.
graphics and chart person, so I need to have that at all times. Yeah, we got that thing going on.
Commissioner Matlow.
Well, first of all, thank you for the presentation. It was great. You asked in the beginning how we kind of like to see things. For me personally, it helps to see. I know with the online budget, you can kind of get the big picture, but then to get kind of a smaller picture, it takes additional search steps. So I don't know if there's an easier way to see maybe more subcategories and those sorts of things itemized in the budget, maybe not down to, you know, the individual sale, but just a department's budget and what that breaks down to and how that's allocated. And then the second point, we kind of touched on it earlier, making sure we're being presented results that show the good and the bad, because we definitely want to celebrate all the good things that we're doing, but we also need to be aware of, you know, numbers that don't look so good, you know, so we can address those issues as we develop the budget. And I guess that ties into my third point. I guess the only new statement we really issued was the impact of poverty. So I'd like to see, as we're developing this budget and we're thinking about how we're going to spend money, we're consciously thinking about how that can drive the needle there, and if we need to move money around, or if we need to just be more intentional with the types of things that we purchase and spend with that in mind.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay. I was going to move that we accept the report, Mr. Mayor, and approve the amendments as presented by staff.
It's been properly moved by the Mayor Pro Tem with amendments. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
It's been properly seconded. Any further comment on the motion itself? I just want to say one more time, great job.
Yeah.
I am also pleased to see the 3-year projection holding steady on the millage rate, holding steady on the fee schedule with the asterisk. I'm very interested in seeing the solid waste study that comes back as well. And that's proper planning, and that's really good work. We do appreciate it. To run a municipality our size with a budget this size and provide world-class services cost a lot of money, and I think y'all do a really good job. Thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes unanimously. Mr. City Manager, do we have anything on the agenda for the workshop?
No, sir. That concludes our business.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you at 4 o'clock.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.